I cut holes in ships for a living. Pirate skiffs, smuggler cans, derelicts that drifted a little too close to navy lanes. If command pointed at a hull and said it needed a door where no door currently existed, that was my job. Torch, charges, patch plates. In another life, I might have ended up like my father, cutting scrap off dead haulers above the Andean Arc. Instead, I wore navy blue, got paid slightly more, and pretended the work was something nobler than taking things apart. The skiff under me that day was nothing special. Old civilian frame, two mismatched engines bolted on like afterthoughts, carbon scoring all along one flank where someone had tried and failed to outrun customs drones. I was anchored to its skin in my mag harness, torch in hand, tracing a neat oval on the plating over its ventral bay. The metal under my glove felt wrong, like the ship wanted to flinch away from me. The vibration running through the plate was too smooth, no engine chatter, no power cycling, just a dull buzz from the tug holding it in place. "Morales, you done flirting with that thing?" Jonah Pike floated a few meters off, heavy weapons slung over his chest. Big man, broad through the shoulders, tattoos snaking out from under his sleeves, where he never quite managed to hide them from regulations. He spun slowly in his harness, bare head bumping lightly against the tether line because he never bothered with a helmet in controlled bays. Almost. I kept the torch steady. She just needs me to talk her through it. That skiff is older than you. Show some respect. I finished the cut, killed the torch, and gave the new plate a testing kick. It sagged inward on its hinges, a neat, compliant mouth giving way to the dim cargo space inside. Another clean hole added to my record. I liked that part. The moment when something sealed and cold turned into passage, when you could feel the ship yield around your lines of stress and heat. Ships made sense to me. Their moods, their aches. It was cramped places I had trouble with. Locks and ducts and squeeze spaces. Anywhere my shoulders brushed bulkhead on both sides, anywhere I could imagine the metal sliding in close and refusing to let go. On the good days, I could keep that memory buried. My faceplate fogged, suit warning tones chattering while an airlock misfired around me in training, inner door jammed, outer seals cycling, someone promising over the intercom that they were almost there for hours, while each minute stretched like wire under tension. On the bad days, I still felt that lock around me, even out here on open hull. "Morales," Kell's voice cut into my helmet, flat and clipped. Lieutenant Commander Harun Kell, team leader, owned a voice that carried the same way gravity did. Quiet, but everything bent a little around it. "On the skiff," I answered, hand on the new plate, eyes on the clean cut. "Wrap it. Briefing room 4 in 10. Briefing room 4 was where they held the meetings that did not exist on paper. "Copy. Do I have time to kiss her goodbye? Leave the skiff alone." A faint edge there. "Bring your torch and demo kit, full load." So not a lecture then. Not review, not rotation talk. Full kit meant a new job. I sealed the hatch, powered down the equipment, and rode the tug's cable back toward the anchorage's hull. The cruiser loomed ahead, metal skin stretching in a long arc. I rested my palm on her plating as I crossed the boundary where the tug's field ended and the ship's gravity well pulled me in. The hum there was familiar. Reactor cycles, life support fans, the heartbeat of a healthy ship. I tried not to think about why Kell wanted me in a room that did not officially exist. Briefing room 4 sat aft, behind 2 bulkheads and a security door that needed Kell's personal code and a retinal scan to open. He waited inside with arms folded, dark uniform immaculate, boots aligned exactly with the grid lines in the deck. There were others in the room already. Rishi Arden, narrow and nervous, fingers hovering near the base of his neck where the stub of his neural jack sat under the skin. Corpsman Arthur Sharp, heavy in the shoulders, shaved scalp, medkit resting against his chair like a loyal dog. Micah Dunn, the youngest, all elbows and wide eyes, marine armor not yet scarred from real work. Jonah slipped through the door behind me, still smoothing down his sleeves where he had hurried into proper uniform. No one spoke. Kel let the quiet sit until it drew our focus in tight around him. Black flag operation. No preamble. Voyager-class tender Vanguard dropped off comms 6 days ago. No transponder, no course corrections, no traffic logs. Patrol found her loitering just off the outer shipping lanes. No visible damage. He tapped his pad. A projection snapped into being over the table. A long, lean vessel, bays along her spine, engines flared at the tail. Vanguard looked like every other fleet tender I had ever touched. Support ship, mobile dock. Not the kind of vessel that went quiet for no reason. Recon drone went in through an access port and got partial footage before we lost it. Another tap. The image shifted to a corridor view, helmet cam, slow pan down a row of bulkheads. No obvious gore, no fire, just something strange on the walls, pale ridges that ran along the junctions where plating met structural ribs. The feed stuttered forward. The ridges thickened into arches, curved over the deck to form half-tunnels. At one junction, they fused with what had once been a man in navy coveralls. He was no longer quite man-shaped. Ribs sawn open from the inside and bent outward, spine elongated and anchored to the deck like a crossbeam. His skull had grown new bone plates over the front, forming a blunt mask with only faint hollows where eye sockets should have been. Dunn made a small sound under his breath. No one looked at him. The feed jumped again to a wider compartment. Racks that had once held equipment were gone, buried under a forest of bone pillars. Some of those pillars still carried bits of uniform, a boot here, a sleeve there. Between them, something moved, a shape like a person in armor, except the armor was not fabricated. It had grown, white plates layered over a frame that had once been flesh, edged and spiked. The thing held a rifle fused into its arm. Where its hand should have been, the bones had wrapped around the weapon's body. The feed cut out. Glass moth. Sharp tapped his teeth with his stylus. You dug that up? Dunn frowned. What is it? I already knew the term, in the same vague way every hull tech knew it. Rumor. Old weapon from the Acheron conflict built to turn enemy bunkers into bone shells. Officially abandoned. Unofficially, well, we all saw things that were officially abandoned. Bioweapon that hijacks bone, Sharp answered. Uses calcium like a kit, stripping ship composites for raw mass. They tried it on cities, stations, ships. It went bad enough even the worst people in the room backed off. It infested the Vanguard. Kel clipped right across Sharp's tone. We do not know how. We do know she still has a functioning FTL drive and she is less than 3 jumps from home. Rishi shifted. If it learns the drive, it may not need to, Kel cut in. Bridge the right circuits, reroute power, force an automatic sequence. That is enough. That is why we are here. He looked at me. Morales, you choose the insertion point on the Vanguard and cut us a door. Once aboard, you plot and open our path to the drive housing. At the drive, you rig charges to sever the core from the ship's frame. Our job is to deny this organism any chance to use that drive. If possible, we bring the core back intact. Failing that, he let that hang. If not, we blow it. We blow the ship, the drive, ourselves if we have to. And trust those blasts do less damage than a living, moving glass moth nest in orbit. I looked at Vanguard's projection. At the tender's long flank and hidden skeleton. The structural ribs and deck lines I knew I would feel under my gloves when I crawled across her skin. What is our disinfectant? Sharp asked, stylus still in hand. If you want quarantine, I need Command's exposure rules. Level 4 containment. Level 4 meant anyone with confirmed exposure did not come back aboard the anchorage. The nice way they worded that meant a shuttle ride into the star, or a neat, tidy bullet in some cold compartment. What is our count? Jonah's arms were folded now, the tattoos on his forearms visible where his sleeves had ridden up. Just us? Us. 1 shuttle, 1 docking umbilical. The anchorage stays outside plausible weapons range. If it has defense control, we do not present a target. Rishi frowned at the projection. Drive core extraction is not small work. Those mounts were never meant to be cut in the field. That is why we bring Morales. Kel did not look away from me. And why you give him every bit of help your talent allows. Rishi's fingers touched the base of his neck, as if feeling for reassurance in the tiny plug under his skin. Yes, Commander. You have until 0500 ship time to prep gear and route plans, Kel finished. We launch then. Questions? A few. None I wanted to ask. I just looked at the image of Vanguard one more moment, tracing in my head the places where her hull would carry stress, where older repairs might lie, where a careful cut would make a door that did not bring the whole frame down. No questions. Preparation was mostly habit. I checked my torch twice, replaced the cutting head with a fresh one. Packed charge bundles in neat rows, each tagged for its purpose. Directional breachers, cutting charges, concussion packs, glove grip enhancers, patch kits, lines, anchors. I lingered over the microcharges longer than I needed to. Little disc-shaped units the size of my thumb meant for quick and dirty fixes. Jammed hatches, stuck panels, impromptu openings in lighter metal. I pocketed more of those than standard. On the way to the shuttle bay, I stopped at the outer corridor that ran just behind the anchorage's skin. No one else around, just me, the curved bulkhead, and the steady hum of a live ship. I laid my palm flat against the metal. There was comfort in that contact. Power cycling, gravity generators doing their work, fans moving atmosphere. Ships had voices if you knew how to listen. They told you where they ached, where they were solid, where trouble might be hiding behind paint and plating. Vanguard had a voice too. The recon footage had given me a glimpse of it, twisted through new bone. I tried to imagine how that hull would feel under my glove. What kind of signal a thing like glass moth would send once it made itself at home. I dropped my hand. No point dwelling. The shuttle bay was already alive with movement when I arrived. Not noisy exactly, but urgent. Crew moving crates, pilots running checks, deck officers watching from the margins in that way they did when something mattered and they wanted to look like they were not hovering. Our shuttle waited near the far wall, nose pointed toward the launch aperture. The thing was basically an armored box around an engine, with seats bolted along the inside and room for gear in the gaps. Its name, Crocus, had been stenciled on the side long enough ago that the paint around it was cleaner than the paint anywhere else. Jonah was strapped into one of the seats, heavy weapon between his knees, helmet resting on the floor beside his boot. Dunn hovered near the ramp, adjusting and readjusting the seal around his neck, like it might change if he worried it enough. Rishi sat with his pad on his lap, eyes half closed as he ran through ship schematics in his memory. Sharp checked injector vials, fingers quick and efficient. Kel stood near the ramp, helmet under his arm. He watched me cross the deck the way he watched everything. Detached, weighing. I climbed aboard, stowed my kit, and dropped into a seat next to Jonah. You look like someone stole your last patch plate, Jonah murmured as I buckled in. Just wondering how mad you will be when I cut the Vanguard's guts open, I replied. You know, once we are standing on them. Jonah gave a short huff. You cut, I shoot. Dunn panics, Rishi freezes. Sharp threatens to euthanize everyone. Kel glares. Normal mission. Dunn glanced over. I do not panic. Not yet. First time is always special. Dunn rolled his eyes and looked away. His armor still fit too neat. No scuffs, no hastily patched segments where shrapnel had bitten into the plates. I remembered being like that once. Before my first live breach. Before my first time hearing someone on the other side of a hull beg us not to cut. Kel stepped onto the ramp. You know the job, he told us. You know the risk. Once we cross, there is no coming back until I call extraction. No one breaks quarantine. No one gets clever without clearing it with me. Morales, you own our doors. Rishi, our eyes. Sharp, the line between us and contamination. Jonah, Dunn, you keep anything that moves from touching anyone. It should not. Short, practical. No speeches. That was why I trusted Kell more than most officers. He did not pretend the work was anything but what it was. We sealed our helmets in unison, one after another, a quiet ritual that never stopped feeling a little like sliding a coffin lid into place. The ramp came up. The shuttle bay doors opened. Crocus launched hard enough that my teeth clicked. Gravity fell away. For a span of heartbeats, there was only the slight push of the harness and the soft rattle of equipment in its webbing. I glanced out the narrow port beside my seat. The anchorage's curve slid away behind us, plated skin glinting faintly. Ahead, Vanguard waited, a long shadow against the distant point field of stars, hull lights dead. She looked inert, quiet, like any other ship powered down between assignments. We all knew better. The shuttle docked without incident. No guns fired on us, no engines flared. The Vanguard let us draw close and clamp on like a remora to a sleeping shark. I opened my route schematic on my wrist screen. The docking umbilical matched to a service port halfway along Vanguard's port flank. From there, a direct corridor led to an intersection that would normally feed crew decks to one side and hangar bays to the other. Engineering lay further aft, beyond a central trunk of structural supports and utility ducts. Which plate? Kell's voice in my ear. I traced in my mind where the internal frames sat, where older repairs might have left hidden seams. There. A patch panel covering a maintenance crawl space that led into the main corridor system. A little aft of the docking ring, low risk of compromising major systems, still close enough for a straight shot inward. I pointed the hand laser at the hull as Crocus's internal hatch opened onto the docking umbilical. A dot lit up on the schematic, then on the hull itself as the shuttle's external cameras tracked my mark. We moved into the umbilical one by one. The tunnel clamped flush to Vanguard's outer skin, magnetic clamps biting down with a faint tremor that ran into my boots. On the far end, a circular hatch waited, dead, no power. I knelt by the hatch, palmed the metal, felt for where the plating took load and where it gave a little. Behind this, I knew, lay the outer edge of the maintenance crawl space. A void, then more hull. I could feel it in the way the metal responded. I set my torch. Small oval, low, I told them, mostly for done. We go in crouched, not crawling, less silhouette for anything waiting inside. I cut. The torch bit into the metal with familiar resistance. The ring of softened plating glowed dull in my visor before the filters compensated. I traced a neat curve. Listened. Let my gloved palm stay braced to feel any change in the hull's response. Any shift deeper inside. There was something. A tremor. Faint, almost below perception. I slowed the cut, focused. The vibration was not ship systems, not the beat of power distribution or life support, more like someone drumming fingers on the far side of a wall. Patterns. Short bursts, then longer ones. The kind of thing that could pass for random until you listened long enough. Morales? I feel tapping, I answered. Not from our side. Internal power is low, but some systems are still drawing, Rishi offered. Could be old subsystems resetting. No, I murmured. This is not mechanical. As if on cue, the tapping changed. A rising pattern, then a pause. Like whatever was inside had heard us arrive. I finished the cut, killed the torch, and drove my boot into the new plate. It swung inward on cut hinges, revealing a narrow, dark space beyond. Not a full corridor, more like a half-height passage, enough to crouch in. I clipped my line to the threshold. I go first, Jonah behind me. Done, you are third. Rishi, Sharp, Kell. No one touches anything they do not have to. And if something touches us? Jonah asked, heavy weapon ready. Shoot it, Sharp answered. If that fails, I will kill you myself before it finishes the job. No one laughed. I ducked through the new opening and into Vanguard. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Ships always had background noise. Even with your helmet on, even with comms as your main line of sound, there were little things your body felt. Distant systems, the sense of machinery doing its work. Vanguard felt dead in a way that went beyond her dark lights. We hunched through the maintenance passage and out into the main corridor. Here the ceiling was higher, space wide enough for 3 men abreast. The deck was bare metal, the walls were not. Pale ridges ran along every junction between plates and support columns. At first they looked like insulation or some kind of foam, but the closer I looked, the more my skin prickled. These ridges had texture, striations like the surface of long bones, grooves and nodes in patterns that matched nothing in any engineering manual. They grew around conduit housings and handholds, wrapping and reinforcing, as if trying to turn the corridor into a giant ribcage. Dunn whispered a curse. Eyes forward, Kell reminded us. Morales, route. I brought up the map overlay, marked our position, and tagged the path toward the central intersection. On paper, it was a short walk. We moved in a staggered line, weapons sweeping, boots clicking. Every few steps, a faint shiver ran under my soles. At first, it came from ahead. Then, after a junction, from behind. It made no sense on a conscious level, but my body knew enough to feel watched. The first body was just past the intersection. He hung halfway out of a side door, arms extended toward the corridor as if he had tried to crawl. Naval uniform, tags half covered by bone growth where his collarbone should have been. The flesh had not rotted. It had been repurposed. His ribs had pierced through his own skin from the inside, curving out like hooked fingers. They had grown far past any normal length, curving across his chest and into the frame around the door. His spine had swollen, vertebrae fusing into an arch that braced against the deck. Bits of his face remained visible above a heavy layer of new bone, a mouth frozen open, teeth clenched, eyes gone. I had worked salvage all my life. I had seen decompressed bodies, burned bodies, men cut in half by misjudged charges. This disturbed me in a different way. The ship had used him, turned his skeleton into a bracket. He was load-bearing now. Rishi made a strangled sound. This is organized. It is following stress lines. He was right. The growth across the door frame spread into the wall in neat arcs, reinforcing the junction where corridor and room met. It was the sort of thing an engineer might have designed if you told him he had to use bone instead of steel. A low rattling reached my ears. Not the ship, not us. Something hitting metal in short, controlled bursts. Contact front, Jonah murmured. Wait! Sharp's voice stayed calm. Listen. The clatter resolved into a pattern. 3 strikes. Pause. 2. Pause. 3. A response came from behind us. 2, 3, 2. The deck shivered with it. They are talking, Rishi whispered. They know we are here, Kell said. Stay tight. We reached another intersection. The bone ridges here were thicker, curving from wall to wall, floor to ceiling, turning the crossing into something like the center of a vast, curved cage. In the right-hand corridor, the growth had sealed doorways entirely. On the left, it had done the same. Only straight ahead remained mostly open, though pale strands already reached for each other across the ceiling, like fingers groping to touch. Engineering is aft along that route, Rishi told us quietly. If the ducts are blocked, this may be our only way. Kell considered for a heartbeat, then gave a small nod. We stepped into the crossing. The tapping stopped. Silence thickened. A shape moved at the far end of the open corridor, half in shadow. Night. That was the name the files used. Glass moth combat forms assembled from infected Marines and security personnel. This one stood maybe half a head taller than Dunn in his armor. Its bones formed plates over its shoulders and chest, overlapping shingles of white that did not match any human anatomy. The arms had elongated, upper limbs thickened into clubs, forearms narrow, hands gone. In their place, bone had grown around a rifle, encasing the barrel and stock so thoroughly that only the trigger assembly and muzzle remained exposed. It took one step forward. The deck creaked under its weight. Behind us, metal rang. Another shape detached itself from the bone walls at the rear of the intersection, emerging slowly. More white plates, more misshapen limbs. We were in a kill box. "Light them!" Kel snapped. Jonah opened up first, heavy rounds slamming into the forward night. The impacts chipped bone, punched through gaps, sent fragments spinning into the air. The thing did not fall. It staggered, then planted its fused rifle limb against a support strut and returned fire, wild at first and then unnervingly controlled. Shots struck the walls around us in bursts. One caught Dunn's shoulder plate, spinning him sideways. Sharp dragged him back into cover by his harness, injector in his other hand. Behind us, the second knight advanced, firing down the corridor. The bone growth behind it stirred, as if more shapes might shake loose. I snapped open my kit and grabbed one of the concussion charges. Not as neat as a cutting charge. More brute force. "Cover!" I barked. Jonah shifted, putting himself between me and the nearest fire. Rounds sparked off his armor. He grunted once, more annoyed than wounded. I slapped the charge onto the bone nearest the right-hand wall, thumbed the activator and ducked. The blast slammed into us, hard enough that I felt it through armor and harness. The charge was directional, focused away from the main hull, but the overpressure still made my ears ring. Bone shattered, spraying shards across the corridor. The wall blew open into a smaller compartment, a storage space or crew locker, its contents flung outward in a burst of floating rubble. More importantly, the blast gave us a third direction. "Kel," I said, "through the side room." "Go!" Jonah pivoted, laying suppressing fire down both corridors. Dunn scrambled past me into the new hole, followed by Sharp hauling his kit. Rishi slid after them, limbs awkward in his suit. I moved next, ducking into the ragged opening, feeling fragments grind under my boots. Kel followed, last out, firing controlled bursts across the intersection before diving through. The shock from the charge had done more than open the wall. It had run through the bone arcs above, fracturing them in ways I could feel. Little tremors shuddered through the deck as the organism redistributed weight. The knights in the corridor advanced to the intersection, their bone armor scoring as they brushed against new edges. Neither tried to follow us into the side compartment. Instead, they moved past, merging gradually back into the bone ridges, plates blending into the growth like chameleons sinking into bark. "Morales!" Kel's visor turned towards me. "New route." My lungs felt tight, from the way the storage compartment's walls leaned in, from the sense that there was too much ship above my head and too few exits. "Give me the map," I muttered, bringing the schematic into focus. We were off the main corridor now, in a side room that connected to a maintenance block. That block fed into the central spine, the main duct that ran the length of Vanguard, carrying cables and access passages along her structural backbone. No one liked crawling the spine. Even in a healthy ship, it was a cramped, awkward place, full of sharp edges and blind corners. In a ship infested with glass moth, it was worse. "We could try the main corridor later," Rishi suggested, breath audible in the link. "Once we clear this level, we might find a cleaner access." "Primary corridors are fortified," Sharp countered. "It is building choke points. Stay there and we play its game. If we avoid those spaces entirely, we never get to the drive," Kel cut in. His gaze stayed steady on me. "Morales." "The spine," I answered. "Access from this block, through the trunk, down past crew decks. It bypasses some heavy bulkheads. If we want a straight shot without fighting every knight it has, we go through the spine." "Crawl space?" Jonah asked, already knowing. "Mostly." No one noticed the way my hands flexed against my rifle grip. At least I hoped they did not. "Then the spine," Kel decided. "Morales leads. Rishi, track power. Sharp, watch suits. Jonah, done. Keep the line intact." We moved again. The spine access hatch sat at the far end of a service corridor behind the storage block. The corridor itself had not been fully claimed yet. The bone ridges touched only the corners, thin and exploratory. The hatch looked almost normal, a simple circular door with manual handles and an old-fashioned warning stencil around it. I worked the manual wheel. The hatch groaned open, hinges resisting in a way that did nothing for my nerves. Inside lay a narrow tunnel, barely tall enough to kneel in and wide enough for one man. Cable runs lined its sides. Above, I could make out the faint bulge of the structural beam that formed Vanguard's spine. The low tremor I had felt before was stronger here. The metal under my glove quivered in clear sequences. It reminded me of heartbeat monitor lines, if those lines had been carved into steel. "Helmet lights only," Kell instructed. "No broad beams. We do not know how it senses." I clipped my line to the hatch frame, attached the other end to my harness, and slid inside. The tunnel was tighter than it had looked. My shoulders brushed cables on either side. My helmet scraped the overhead once. The first few meters were clear metal. Then the bone began. It started as thin threads stretching across the tunnel like cobwebs. They had a faint sheen, hard to the touch. When my glove brushed one, it made a soft, brittle crack. The broken piece did not fall. It stayed suspended, as though anchored at some point inside the wall. Farther in, the threads thickened. Some grew from the floor, arching upward, others from the ceiling downward. They converged in gentle, organic curves that turned the tunnel from a metal pipe into something like the throat of a living thing. "Comfortable?" Jonah's voice came from behind me, close in the comm. "I have had worse dates," I muttered. Dunn gave a nervous little chuckle. We crawled. Every meter forward tightened something inside my chest. The sense of the ship above and below me, the weight of all that metal and bone pressed in. There were no side branches here, no alcoves to duck into if things went wrong. Just a long tube, us in the middle, organism all around. The metal under me thrummed harder. It felt like it was moving along with us, racing ahead, then falling behind, carrying messages beyond our reach. "Morales," Rishi's voice came thin through the link. "Power is shifting toward your section. Something is waking up around you." As if in answer, the bone threads ahead of me flexed. They did not have muscles, not in any way I understood. But something in them tensed, pulling them tighter across the passage. The curve of one segment shifted, narrowing the gap just enough that my helmet might struggle to fit through. "Move," Kell ordered. I did. The trick in a crawl like that is to keep your pattern. Knee, hand, knee, hand. Do not stop long enough to think about how far there is to go. A sharp, metallic tap rang through the tunnel. It came from the walls now, not some distant compartment. The bone threads vibrated in time with it. Ahead, something long and pale slid through a slit in the wall, whipping across the tunnel inches from my visor. It was a limb, but not like any limb I had seen. It looked as if someone had taken a spine, shaved off every bit of meat, and threaded it through a flexible sheath, turning vertebrae into a segmented whip. It withdrew, vanished through a different slit, and struck again from another angle, testing, feeling us out. "Filament forms," Sharp commented, far too calm for my taste. "They use those to probe ducts. Do not let them get a grip on your suit." The limb struck my arm this time, glancing off hard armor. The impact was strong enough to shove me sideways. Cables dug into my ribs, bone threads scraped my helmet. The tunnel felt suddenly half as wide as it had a moment before. I forced myself forward. If I stayed where I was, I would block the others. If one of those filaments found purchase on a leg or an arm back there, it might pull them sideways, snagging them on the narrowing bone. The tunnel sloped slightly downward. Gravity shifted as Vanguard's inactive systems protested our movement. Somewhere a thruster or mass balancer tried to compensate and failed. "Movement behind us," Jonah reported. "More filaments." "Keep going," Kell ordered. "Morales, how far to the next side access?" I glanced at my wrist screen. The tunnel map looked simple. Straight run, then an access hatch into a junction room. The problem with simple maps is they do not show what new growth might block. 20 meters, I answered. Maybe less. The tunnel shook. This was not glands. This was the ship. The shaking came in a single sharp jolt, like something heavy slamming into the hull far away. Gravity hiccuped. Down shifted sideways, then back, sending us all lurching toward one wall. My hand slipped. My knee missed its usual brace. For a stretched instant, I was wedged at a bad angle, shoulder jammed against bone, neck at a tilt that made my visor press into the tunnel wall. I could not move forward or back. The memory of that training lock roared up, unbidden. Helmet fogging, suit alarms rising in pitch, the weight of doors closing around me, edges grinding, no space to turn. My fingers locked. "Morales!" Kel's voice knifed through the panic. "Move!" The word stuck. Behind me someone cursed. The tunnel filled with thrashing. A filament wrapped around a boot, yanked. Another wrapped around Jonah's injured arm. He bellowed, shoved his shoulder into the wall, bracing. Dunn screamed once. There is a sound a man makes when something takes him in a space that small. It is not loud. There is no room for full volume. It is thin and raw and cuts straight through armor and training. I forced my palm forward, forced my knee to follow. Metal scraped my suit. Bone pressed against my backplate, then slid away. The tunnel opened up by a hair, enough for me to free one shoulder. Another jolt ran through the ship. The filament spasmed, then retracted as if something had given different orders. I lunged forward. After that first freeing motion, my body remembered how to move. Head down, do not look back. I reached the side access hatch and slammed my gloved hand against the manual release. It stuck for a second, then gave. The hatch swung inward into a junction space barely larger than a lift car. I hauled myself out, turned, and grabbed for the next man. Jonah emerged first, armor scored where the filaments had struck. One arm hung a little loose at the shoulder. "Done!" he gasped. I looked past him. The tunnel behind was a mess of bone threads and cables. Somewhere beyond the tangle, movement writhed. A helmet visor flashed once in our lights, then vanished under a curtain of pale segments. There was no way back in without crawling straight into that writhing mass. Sharp appeared next, pulled along by Kel. Rishi stumbled out behind them. "Dunn is gone," Kel reported. "We do not risk 4 more for one man who is already in the nest." My throat closed around protest. Not because I thought we could save Dunn, because a part of me knew that if I had not frozen for those heartbeats, if I had kept moving when Kel told me to move, Dunn might have made it through ahead of the filament wave. Sharp met my eyes for a fraction of a second. Whatever he saw there, he filed it away without comment. "We are burning time," he observed, "and I am not convinced the organism will stay distracted. Where are we?" Kel's focus shifted to me again. I checked my map. "Just aft of crew quarters. Junction to nav hub is the next compartment over. From there, we can access the main trunk to engineering. Then we go, and we count Dunn's loss against Command's decision to send us into this with half a brief, not against our choices mid-tunnel." Easy for him to say. He had not frozen. The navigation hub looked like a shrine to bad decisions. Hologrid projectors lined the ceiling, many cracked, some still projecting faint ghostly lines of old course data into the air. The central table where the navigator would stand and plot routes lay half buried under bone growth, white arcs curling over its edges, merging into the floor. The man who had stood at that table was still there. He was not upright anymore. Glass moth had grown him into the console. His legs had fused to the deck up to mid-thigh. His spine had elongated and bent, vertebrae stretching out of his back into the central pillar of the console. His arms had sunk into the surface, bone branching into thin strands that laced through the table's innards. His skull had split along the central seam, each half wrapped in new bone that reached down into the console like cables. Where his eyes had been, smooth plates covered the sockets. Only his teeth showed through a gap in the bone mask, clenched and still. "It is using him as an interface, direct link into navigation." "Can you pull data?" Kel asked. Rishi moved closer with obvious reluctance, slipping between bone strands as carefully as if they were live wires. He tapped his pad, fingers moving with familiar speed. Tiny lights flickered around the edge of the console in response. "This core is armored," Rishi murmured. Standard redundancy. Logs here in case the bridge dies. He paused. Something has been forcing access. Multiple failed attempts in the last day before silence. So it is experimenting, Sharp said, trying to learn how to jump. Rishi nodded. It does not understand the code paths, but it can push voltage. It has been prodding. Anything else? Kel pressed. Rishi brought up a set of entries, casting them into a hologram over the dead navigator. Ship log, short notations, patrol route corrections, routine reports. Then further down, a highlighted entry. Orders from fleet, Rishi explained. Vanguard was told to divert into a rubble cloud near the outer system. Contact was lost after that. Rubble, Jonah muttered. Or something they knew was not rubble. Rishi scrolled. Another entry appeared, marked priority. New orders, he went on. Observe and report anomalous biological signatures. Do not engage suspected glass moth without direct authorization. He looked up. They knew, I whispered. They knew glass moth was out there and sent a tender in like bait. They will say it was a risk worth taking, Sharp replied. We have seen their math before. Rishi continued. Here, auto-jump queue. He widened the entry. Navigator set a preloaded jump chain back to a secure yard. Standard precaution. Did the organism trigger it? Kel demanded. No, safety's held. It tried, but without the right authentication, it could not start the sequence. So, Kel's voice went flat. Glass moth got aboard. It started converting crew and structure. It reached this hub and pushed at the jump system. It has not succeeded. Our job is to make sure it never does. That is not secondary, a new voice interrupted over the comm. Captain Oren Falco, commanding officer of the anchorage, carried the kind of weight in his tone that made you sit up a little straighter, even when he was nowhere near you. The connection was compressed and slight, distance adding a faint delay. Containment comes first, Commander, Falco continued. But we would strongly prefer a functioning core. These things are not built in a week. I would prefer a world that did not need them, Sharp muttered. Falco ignored him if he heard. Time is not on your side. Our scans show increased thermal cycling around the drive section. Whatever it is doing it faster now. We are moving, Kel answered. Morales, most direct route from here to engineering that avoids major concentrations. Already on it, I said. My mind tripped through the schematic, now annotated with the reality we had seen. Main corridors fortified, spine behind us alive and hungry, ducts near crew quarters compromised. There is a trunk access from this hub, I told them. Service route down into engineering, part duct, part ladder, tighter than corridors but not as bad as the spine. We left the navigator to his new function as part of the ship's nervous system and dropped into the trunk. The service trunk was makeshift even before Glass Moth. Navy builds those with whatever space is left after actual systems are laid down. The ladder rungs did not line up. The duct segments were at odd angles. Cable bundles hung too low in places. The organism had begun to take advantage. Bones stretched along the ladder rails, reinforcing them. Plates grew from the walls, shaping the trunk into a more regular tube. In one section, thin ribs arched overhead, not yet fully fused, still porous. I could see through them into dark spaces beyond where other decks should have been. As we descended, the metal under my gloves picked up in uneven pulses, like something huge and hidden working harder. We are getting close, Rishi murmured. Engineering is one deck down. Any power on the drive? Kel asked. Field coils idle, Rishi answered, but the control ring spikes. Something is energizing circuits in the wrong order. Trial and error. Or trial and success, Sharp countered. We have no idea how quick this thing learns. I kept my focus on the ladder, one rung at a time. The space around me felt tighter by the meter, as if the walls were angling inward. About halfway down, my boot hit something that shifted. I glanced down. The next rung was not metal. It was bone, grown in a thick, rounded bar where steel should have been. The surface was rough, ridged, with tiny notches all along its length. I lowered my foot onto it. The sensation under my sole changed. Not just pressure now, but a faint oscillation. The organism was not only growing structures, it was growing instruments. "Do you feel that?" I asked. "Yes," Sharp answered. "It is playing." I did not ask what he meant. We reached the bottom of the trunk and dropped into a lateral passage. Here the bone growth dominated. The original walls were only glimpses of grey between white plates. The deck had been overlaid with thick, uneven layers that turned flat flooring into something like a frozen sea. And straight ahead, the hatch to engineering stood partly open. Bone spilled through the gap like ice forced between rocks. I stopped just short of the threshold. Whatever lay beyond that hatch would be worse than what we had seen so far. I knew it in my bones. The organism would have focused its efforts on the drive, wrapping the most valuable hardware in the ship in a shell of living armor. Kel stepped up beside me. "This is where we earn our pay. Morales, we need eyes inside before we commit." I nodded and reached for a microcharge. Small blast. Enough to clear Bone without tearing the hatch assembly out. "Set for clearing only," I murmured, more to keep my hands moving than because they needed the reminder. I wedged the charge in among the white growth that clogged the gap, backed us up and triggered it. The blast was tight, focused. Bone shattered inward, opening the gap wide enough for a man to slip through, crouched. Fragments clattered against the interior beyond. I slid into the gap first. Engineering on a Voyager-class ship is normally a high-ceilinged space dominated by the drive ring. A torus of coils the size of a small house, mounted around a dense core block. Walkways crisscross around it. Control stations line the walls, pipes, cables, conduits everywhere. Vanguard's engineering bay had been turned into something else. The drive ring was still there, but half of it had vanished under a carapace of bone. White plates curved over the coils in layered segments, merging with the support struts and the surrounding deck. Some of those plates bore the faint outlines of human ribs and skulls. Others were smoother, grown from pure calcium, no longer clearly borrowed from a particular host. Around the base of the ring, clusters of fused rib cages formed what looked like seats or nests. In each, the remains of crew members lay socketed into the structure, limbs swallowed up by new growth, skulls threaded into the bone network. Pulse head clusters perched along the drive supports, knots of fused skulls, jaws open, teeth pressed together. Tiny bone rods protruded from their sides, ticking against the metal in precise, continuous patterns. The deck under my boots hummed. The whole bay felt like a giant instrument under slow, relentless fingers. "I do not think we can take the ring out intact," Rishi whispered. He was not wrong. The organism had anchored the ring into the ship's frame with layers of bone far thicker than any mounting strut. Removing it would mean cutting through both steel and glass moth growth. "We do not have to make it pretty," Kel replied. "We just have to make it unable to jump." "Command wants that core," Rishi reminded him. "Command is not here." The old tension surfaced in that simple statement. Orders versus reality. We all felt it. Kel turned to me. "Morales, what does it take to cut that core free enough that it cannot complete a jump pattern? I do not care how much of the ship you tear apart." I scanned the bay, tracing structural lines. The ring itself mounted on 6 main support pylons, each anchored into the deck. The core block sat at the center, suspended by field couplers even when inactive. "If we sever 3 pylons," I began, "the ring loses alignment. That alone should make any jump impossible, but Glass Moth has reinforced those joints. Charges will have to be internal, as close to the original mount points as possible." I pointed to a narrow gap between bone plating and the ring. "There is an access trunk behind the pylons, triangular cross-section, maintenance space for field techs. If I crawl through and plant cutting charges on the original struts, the blast should shear the mounts without fracturing the core." Another crawl, smaller than the spine. Every part of me recoiled at the idea. Any other option? Jonah asked quietly. Not if we want the core intact, Rishi answered. External charges will wreck more than mounts. Kel's tone hardened. Then Morales goes into the trunk. Alone? There is only room for one, I answered before Kel could. Space was built for techs, not squads. Filament activity is low near the pylons, Rishi added. For now, it may be focused elsewhere. For now, Sharp repeated. We keep using those words and then act surprised when now changes. Sharp, monitor suits while Morales works, Kel ordered. Jonah, done is gone. That is on command, not on you. You cover the main entrance. Rishi, find anything that looks like jump control and smash it. We do this fast. Fast, he agreed. I made myself walk toward the maintenance trunk. The access opening sat behind a panel partially buried under bone near the base of one pylon. I pried the panel free with my knife, revealing a triangular opening just wide enough for my shoulders if I angled them carefully. Inside, the trunk sloped up and around the back of the ring, following the curve of the coils. The noise in the bone was even stronger here, focused, as if the organism had repurposed the trunk as part of its internal sound system. I clipped my line to the opening, secured the other end to my harness, and looked back at the others. Jonah gave me a one-finger salute, half a grin that did not reach his eyes. Rishi nodded once, pad already linked to engineering consoles. Sharp watched my suit readings on his scanner. Kel stood a little apart, the weight of command visible in the way he held his shoulders. Do not stop, Kel told me. Whatever happens in there, keep moving until the charges are set. I wanted to tell him that stopping was the problem, that my body loved stopping in small spaces, that it did it all on its own when fear wrapped around the old memory and squeezed. Instead, I crouched, turned sideways and slid into the trunk. It was worse than the spine. The triangle cross-section left no room to shift. One corner of the triangle was down, the other two angled up to either side. I lay with my chest against one side, back against the other, head tilted. I could not straighten my neck fully. Bone lined the interior. Struts. They grew from the corners, crossing the space in diagonal bars, forcing me to snake around them. Each time I slipped past one, its surface brushed my chest plate or thigh, leaving a faint powdery trace. Filaments snaked through gaps in the struts. They hung, quivering like antennae waiting for a signal. Suit integrity nominal, Sharp reported in my ear. No punctures yet, try to keep it that way. Helpful, I muttered. The first mount point lay maybe 1/3 of the way around the ring. I could not see it yet, but I felt the change in the structure around me. The bone struts thickened, converged. The low hum in them took on a different character, deeper, resonant. I reached a thin seam in the trunk wall and peered through. Beyond lay a narrow gap between the maintenance space and the metal of the pylon. Bone packed much of that space, but I could still make out the original mount brace, steel beams bolted into the ring. The gap was barely wide enough to slip a charge through. I dug my kit out, fingers awkward in the confined angle, and positioned the first charge against the strut. I set the timer to manual, no automatic count. I wanted control over the sequence. One down, I reported. Moving to the next. That is one, Jonah replied. Only 2 more and an entire ship between us and home. Easy day. His attempt at humor fell flat, but I appreciated it. I crawled on. Halfway to the second mount, the bone struts shifted. They did not move much, just enough to angle inward, brushing my sides, forehead, boots. Enough to remind me I was inside the body of a thing that could crush me without effort. Suit scraping, Sharp reported quietly. No breach yet, but your margin is gone. Do not linger. Not planning to, I answered, breath shorter than I liked. The filaments stirred now. They flowed around my limbs like pale eels in a too small pool. None wrapped fully, but their presence against my armor made every nerve fire in protest. My chest started to feel tight again, that lock memory rising. The sense that the walls were moving, that they would close in until there was not even enough space to inhale. I forced my focus to the next meter, the next bend, the next charge. Second mount, another seam, another glimpse of original steel under all the white growth. I placed the charge with fingers that felt too big for my gloves. 2, Sharp confirmed. You are almost there. Almost. A word with too much stretch. As I started toward the third mount, a sound reached me from outside the trunk. Gunfire. Short, controlled bursts. Jonah's pattern. Then another sound, deeper and slower, the heavy thumps of night weapons. Contact at the hatch, Jonah grunted over the link. 2 knights, maybe 3. They are trying to push into engineering. Hold them, Kell ordered. We cannot have anything reaching Morales while he is inside the trunk. Sharp, how about those containment fantasies of yours? Now would be a good time to vent something. Any vent I open might pull this entire bay into vacuum, Sharp warned, including Morales. I would prefer not to be vented today, I put in. A sharp, metallic clang rang through the trunk. Light ahead flickered as something heavy struck the outside of the pylon. The bone struts shivered all around me. The organism had decided the maintenance trunk was a priority. The filaments thickened. New segments grew in front of me as I watched, weaving a mesh across the tunnel. Bone oozed from the corners in small, fast buds, hardening almost instantly. I lunged forward, slamming my shoulder against the growing net. It gave under my weight, cracking, but did not fully break. I forced my knee into one of the gaps, driving with as much leverage as the cramped space allowed. A fine crackling ran along the struts. Tiny fractures raced across them. The mesh gave way. I tumbled forward a half-meter, chest slamming into the angled wall. Suit impact, Sharp noted. No breach. Morales, you are taking too long. I am moving as fast as I can without losing limbs, I snapped. Outside, the gunfire pattern changed. Shorter bursts, more frequent. Jonah breathing hard in the link. 2 down, he panted. Third one is angry. I am not sure they have that emotion, Sharp replied. Whatever they have, it wants my face. The third mount was close now. My body felt it before my eyes did, in the way the trunk's curve shifted, in the deepening thrum under my chest. The bone struts pressed so tight at one point that I had to exhale fully to squeeze my torso through, armor scraping on both sides. I reached the seam. The view beyond was worse than the previous 2. Bone had fused almost entirely across the gap, leaving only a few narrow channels. Through those I glimpsed the mount brace, steel almost entirely swallowed. This one is buried, I reported. I will have to dig. Sharp? Kell's question carried more urgency now. She only needs a contact patch, Sharp replied. As long as explosive force reaches the original joint, the blast will do the rest. Only, I murmured. I drew my knife and began shaving bone away from the gap. It flaked in thin curls, some clinging to the blade, others sticking to my gloves. The sound in the struts changed, picking up a jittery undertone. It did not like this. Another clang, this one closer, reverberating through the trunk like a hammer on metal. Chunks of bone dust fell around me. Kell, Jonah gasped. We have breach on the left flank. One found a way through the auxiliary duct. I can hold for maybe 10 seconds. Then it is in the bay. Sharp! Any way to cut it off without compromising the bay? Kell demanded. One bulkhead between Jonah and the duct, Sharp replied. Manual seal is at his position. Once closed, that door does not reopen without tools. That door is 10 meters from the trunk opening, Jonah added. If I close it, I am on the wrong side with the knights. The third clang hit even harder. The trunk groaned. My knife slipped, skidding across bone and scraping my glove. Morales, Kell snapped. How close? Almost there, I grunted. Another minute. We do not have a minute, Sharp cut in. If that knight reaches the trunk, it will send filaments inside, and you will not finish at all. Silence, brief and heavy. I knew that silence. It was the moment when options narrowed to 2, and both were ugly. Bulkhead, Kell ordered. Jonah, seal it. Now. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Jonah spoke, voice low. If I do, that is it. You know that. I know that if you do not, Morales dies in that trunk, the ring stays intact, and this mission fails, Kell answered. Seal the bulkhead. That is an order. My hand slipped on the knife. Bone chips flew. The gap widened. Morales! Jonah's voice came through, closer than it should have. I imagined him at the bulkhead control, nights closing in. You finish the job, you hear me? You finish it. My throat constricted. Jonah! You freeze again. I will haunt you, he added, a ghost of humor under the urgency. Then his tone went hard. Do it, Dax. He used my name. He almost never did. I saw in my mind the lever in his grip, the door that would slide down, cutting him off. No hero speech, no clean sacrifice, just a heavy slab of metal dropping and leaving a man on one side with monsters and the rest of us on the other. Time stretched. I could hear the training lock in my head again, the hiss of seals, the thunk of doors. I remembered the way no one had been able to reach me for hours, not because they did not want to, but because metal and protocol and fear got in the way. Some part of me recoiled from putting anyone else in that space. Another part, the part that had spent my life reading hulls and counting stress lines, knew exactly what would happen if we left the door open. Nights through the duct, filaments into the trunk. Me trapped halfway, cut apart or dragged out and turned into a brace. Mission failed. Earth on the line. Jonah's breath grew harsher in the link. They are here. Make the call. It was my call, whether Kell framed it as an order or not. I controlled the charges. I controlled doors when I wanted to. I could scream no, demand another plan, try to hold the bulkhead half closed and buy time. I could take that risk. Or I could follow the path that still led to success. The path that left me breathing on the side with more metal between me and monsters. I pressed my knife deeper into the bone, carving a little faster, as if that would make any difference at all. Kell, I forced out. Seal it. The word left a taste in my mouth like ground metal. There was a beat of silence, then a heavy thunk ran through the trunk. The feel of the metal changed. A door had moved. Jonah laughed once, short and sharp. About time you made a selfish choice, he muttered. Give them hell for me. The gunfire cut off mid-burst. Somewhere beyond the pylon, impact sounds continued for a few breaths. Then those too faded into the background tick of bone on steel. Bulkhead sealed, Sharp reported. His voice had gone very neutral. Engineering secure on our side. Rishi whispered a curse in his own language. Kell said nothing. I dug the last sliver of bone from the gap and shoved the third charge into place. It stuck snug against the mount brace. Charges set, I reported. Manual trigger ready. Get clear of the trunks, Kell instructed. As far as you can. I will be at the opening, Sharp added. If any filament follows you, I will cut it. I backed out of that trunk like a man crawling from a grave. The bone struts pressed tight all around me, as if reluctant to let me go now that I had bitten them. Filaments brushed across my armor with restless energy. The tone along them had shifted to a higher pitch, agitation instead of calm. Every scrape of my suit felt like a potential breach. Every brush of bone felt like fingers closing around my ribs. The opening appeared ahead, a triangle of slightly brighter darkness. Sharp's helmet light glowed beyond it, a single focused beam. A filament shot toward my hand from the side, fast and eager. Sharp's arm snapped forward. Metal flashed in his grip, some short tool or blade, and the filament sheared off just before it wrapped fully around my glove. The severed tip thrashed, then went limp. Suit integrity intact, Sharp reported. Move! I lunged, shoulders scraping, chest dragging along bone. For a second I thought I might stick, that the trunk would hold me in like a throat tightening around swallowed food. Then I was out, rolling onto the engineering deck beside the access panel, the bone dust on my armor turning the world into pale specks for a heartbeat before my visor adjusted. Rishi knelt by a console, hands moving fast. Kell stood near the drive ring's main control node. Sharp hovered between me and the hatch, scanner in one hand. One absence hurt more than all the horrors in the room. Jonah was gone. "Charges ready," I stated. "All 3 mounts, blast vectors away from the core as much as I could manage." "Any risk of uncontrolled jump?" Kel asked. "Minimal," Rishi answered before I could. "The field will not hold alignment once those mounts blow. No clean wave front. It will be like trying to launch from a shattered rail." "Then we do it," Kel decided. "Morales, on your signal. We drop the core and leave whatever is still alive to starve." "Command may want a more thorough cleanup," Falco's voice cut in. "If you can rig secondary charges to—" "We are out of time," Kel interrupted. "This is our shot. They can send another team if the politicians want to sift through bones later." A pause on the channel. Then Falco spoke again, slower. "Do it, Commander." I brought up the charge interface. 3 markers glowed on my wrist display, each for a pylon. All ready. I triggered all 3 at once. The blasts were not as violent as the corridor breacher, but they were deeper. The force ran through the ship's frame like a blow to the spine. The entire bay lurched. The bone carapace around the ring cracked in branching lines. Plates split, pulse heads shattered, skull fragments spinning out into the air. The ring sagged as the mounts failed. It dropped a fraction of a meter, tilted, slammed into bone armor on the far side. The core block shifted in its harness, one corner slamming against a support beam hard enough to dent metal. Everything under my boots changed. The ordered tapping dissolved into a frantic stutter, then to a distant thrumming. "Field alignment degraded," Rishi reported, half awed, half terrified. "Even if something triggers a jump now, it will probably tear this ship apart instead of sending it anywhere." "Probably. Never ask for guarantees in my line of work." I looked at Kel. The man was steady as ever, but something in his shoulders had shifted. "Primary objective complete. Drive is unusable. Core retrieval is no longer practical. We leave." "Glass moth is still active in the structure," Sharp reminded him. "If they want full containment, they have work left." "They can bring more firepower," Kel answered. "We have lost 2 men, and Morales' charges have done more to this thing than any orbital volley would without risking spore dispersal." In my peripheral vision, I caught Rishi's eyes on me. Gratitude and horror, both. He had seen my face when we ordered the seal. He knew I carried at least part of Jonah's weight. "Extraction!" Kel focused on me again. "The way we came is compromised," I answered automatically. "Spine is bad, trunk is worse, main corridors are fortified. However," I checked the map, noting where my charges had shifted structure. "The blast just opened a shear line through decks above. There is hull near the aft starboard quarter we can punch out through, then ride a lifeline to the shuttle." "Straight through the infected zone?" Sharp asked. "Straight through, but not long. Glass moth will still be reeling. It may not have full coordination." "May," he repeated. "We do love that word." "Options," Kel said. "Morales' route or spine?" No one volunteered for the spine. We moved. The engineering bay had become a maze. Bone plates hung askew. Some had fallen entirely, exposing raw steel and jagged calcium. In one corner, a fused crew cluster had lost its anchors and sagged, bodies hanging like puppets with cut strings. We stepped over them, boots scraping on uneven surfaces. I kept my torch ready, cutting through bone when needed, making new passage where the organism had collapsed old ones. The ordered patterns slowly returned as we climbed, though never as clean as before. It felt like listening to someone mumble after a blow to the head. We passed through barracks where bunks had become scaffolds. Half-eaten meals still sat on tables, plates fused to surfaces by thin bone strings. A dropped child's toy, small ship model, lay half sunk into a growth that had taken over an entire wall. In one corridor we met another knight. This one was slower. Its bone armor bore fractures from the blast. One arm hung useless. Its movements were jerky, as if the organism's control signal had degraded. It still raised its fused weapon. We did not trade fire for long. Kell and Sharp hit its joints with precise bursts while I tossed a microcharge under its center of mass. The blast blew its legs out from under it, shattered the plates around its spine. The organism withdrew from its frame like water draining from a broken container. We reached the hull section I had flagged. This far aft, the growth was thinner. The organism had focused on structural ribs closer to the drive. The plates here looked younger, smoother, still trying to find the right pattern. I laid my palm against the hull, felt for stress lines, for the old frame under the new skin. Here, I decided, marking an oval. Small breach, one at a time. Rishi, prep a lifeline. We anchor to the shuttle's docking point and reel in. Provided Crocus has not become bone art, Sharp added. Radio link shows her intact, Rishi answered. Docking clamp still holds. I fired the torch. Cutting into a living hull is different from cutting dead metal. The feel under my glove changed as the torch bit in, a jitter that travelled up my arm. The bone around the cut line stiffened. Thin threads reached toward the heat. I burned through them one by one, feeling each break like a tiny pop. When the circle was complete, I kicked. The ship's internal pressure took over. The plug blasted outward into space, snapping the bone strands and riding a violent plume of escaping atmosphere. Darkness gaped beyond, pricked by distant stars. I could just see the line of the shuttle's hull in the distance, Crocus hanging where we had left her, tether still intact. Rishi, I prompted. He anchored the lifeline and paid it out, the cable snaking through the breach. The little harpoon at its end sailed across the gap, guided by tiny thrusters, and bit into Crocus's skin with a satisfying shudder. Anchor engaged, reel ready. Morales, Sharp, Rishi, you go first, Kell ordered. I am last out. The man who wants to stay and make sure the job is done, Sharp murmured. Nothing noble, Kell corrected. I'm simply the least useful with a wrench. If anything follows, I cut it loose. We did not argue. I clipped onto the lifeline and slipped through the breach. The transition from infected hull to open space was almost a relief. No walls, no bone, just the line pulling me toward the shuttle and the faint tug of Crocus's field beginning to catch me. For a moment, drifting there, I felt weightless in more ways than one. Then the line jerked. Rishi had activated the reel. I slid faster toward the shuttle, armor scraping the edge on the way out. Splinters of bone spun away into the void. The shuttle's hatch opened as I approached. Automatic sensors keyed to our tags. No one inside. Just waiting seats and the familiar cramped box I had left what felt like a lifetime ago. I landed hard on the deck and rolled, unclipping to make room for Sharp and Rishi. They came in quick succession, Sharp muttering as he slammed into the hull, Rishi more awkward, almost tangling in the line. Clear, I called. Bring Kell in. Rishi worked the reel. For a moment, Kell's armoured form appeared in the breach framed by bone and metal. Behind him, something moved. Filaments reaching, a night shape half pulled out of a wall. Kell fired back into the corridor as he launched himself outward. A burst of tracer rounds stitched across the knight's torso, blowing chunks of bone away. Filaments lanced after him, but he had already cleared the breach. One filament caught his boot at the last instant, wrapping around the ankle joint. Sharp grabbed the lifeline and pulled. The filament stretched. For a heartbeat, it looked like it might snap Kell's leg off at the joint. Then the bone segmented, vertebrae popping apart in a chain, each link losing cohesion. The tip stayed clinging to Kell's boot, while the rest snapped back into the ship. We hauled him aboard. The shuttle hatch sealed. Crocus detached from Vanguard with a shudder that rattled our teeth. Rishi cut the lifeline with a quick command. The cable fell away, floating in the dark between ships like a severed umbilical. The infected tender hung behind us, half her hull now warped by internal damage. The drive section bulged at an odd angle, ring sagging. Bone glinted pale against darker metal. We are clear, Kell reported. Falco's answer came after a brief delay. You have done what you can, Commander. Bring your team home. We will handle the rest. Define handle, Sharp muttered. If necessary, we will position for controlled demolition, Falco replied. But your charges have done most of that work. We may simply hold quarantine and let glass moth consume itself in a dead ship. I doubted it would be that simple. Organisms like that did not tend to lie down and die quietly just because their playground got smaller. But it was no longer my decision. I unclipped fully and slumped back into a seat. 2 of those seats remained empty. Jonah's harness hung open, straps loose. Dunn's gear lay where he had left it before we boarded. Small personal items tucked into pockets in violation of regulations. Kell did not look at either. Debrief in 1 hour, he told us. Sharp, full scans on every suit before anyone sets foot on the anchorage. No exceptions. Rishi, back up all data from Vanguard. Morales, draft a structural report on how the charges hit the drive bay. Captain Falco will want to know exactly what you did to his precious core. Yes, Commander. They kept us in quarantine longer than the token period. Sharp ran his scanners over every seam of our suits, every inch of our skin once we stripped. He took blood, marrow samples, tissue samples, injected us with prophylactics. Any signs? I asked once he finished the first battery. If there were, you would already be dead, he replied. He did not smile. That was how I knew he meant it as reassurance. In his own way. They gave us clean clothes and a small compartment to wait in. 4 bunks for 3 men. Rishi paced the entire time, wearing a rut into the deck. Kell sat at the small table reviewing data on his pad. I lay on the lower bunk and stared at the ceiling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw bone. Threads wrapping through metal. Ribs opening from the inside. A bulkhead sliding down with a final clunk, cutting Jonah off. I had made the right tactical call. That was what I told myself. Mission above individuals. Weigh the risk of 1 man against billions. Basic Navy logic. It still felt like betrayal. At some point, Rishi stopped pacing long enough to look at me. You did what you had to, he murmured. So did you. Back in the nav hub. You pulled the logs. You saw the orders they gave Vanguard before she died. Rishi hesitated. I will be asked to report on that. And? He looked away. I will include it in the technical section, he decided. They can redact as they see fit. Sharp appeared at the door sometime later. You are all clear, he informed us. No sign of glass moth in your systems. If it found a way to hide in your marrow without changing your markers, we will all know soon enough. Comforting, Rishi murmured. Sharp's gaze lingered on me as I pulled on my boots. You froze in the spine, he commented. You moved in the trunk. Congratulations on noticing, I retorted. I am deciding whether that is progress or just different stimulus, he continued. You made a choice in the trunk, an ugly one, but you made it. I sealed a door on a man who trusted me, I snapped. Yes, and because you did, the ring broke instead of jumping. Kell pushed back his chair. This is not a moral tribunal. We followed doctrine under conditions no one on the council will ever understand. We did our duty. Debrief in 20 minutes, Kell reminded us. Do not give them any more blood than they already took. Falco met us in a conference compartment that was too clean, too bright. No bone, no dust, no marks of battle. Just polished table, chairs, and a wall screen showing Vanguard's drifting shape outside. He looked older up close than he sounded over comm, lines around his eyes, a stiffness in the way he moved that spoke of old injuries. You did well, he began. You kept a critical asset out of enemy hands and denied a dangerous organism the means to reach our home world. He listed the facts one by one. Hull breach, initial contact, spine, nav hub, engineering, charges. Each time he prompted one of us to speak. Rishi on systems, Sharp on contagion, me on structural choices. When we reached the part where Dunn died, he made a note. When we reached the part where Jonah sealed the bulkhead, he paused. Walk me through the decision, Falco requested. Kell answered first, laying it out in clear, unemotional terms. Night approaching from auxiliary duct, risk to trunk, Need to protect the ones setting charges. He ordered it, I cut in. Kell ordered the seal, but I made the call. Falco's gaze settled on me. How? He prompted. Jonah asked for an answer, I replied, weighing his life against the mission. I chose the mission. I told Kell to close the bulkhead. I waited for judgment, censure, praise, something. Falco simply nodded. That is consistent with containment doctrine, he observed. Unpleasant but necessary. It will be noted as such in the record. The record, I repeated. Will it also note that Command sent Vanguard into a region where they expected glass moth and told them to observe and report? A flicker went through Falco's eyes then. Not surprise. Something closer to recognition. We received partial logs from your specialist, he acknowledged. You are referring to orders to investigate anomalous biological signatures. Glass moth, I stressed. That code name does not appear in the formal order, he countered. But yes, we suspected residual activity from old weapons programs. We needed data. Vanguard was equipped to gather it. At the cost of her crew, I pressed. Falco's expression did not change. I am not proud of the calculus we do out here, but our job is to protect the core worlds. Sometimes that means sacrificing the edges. Like Dunn, I muttered. Like Jonah. Dunn and Jonah died carrying out a mission that prevented an existential threat from reaching home, Falco answered. You may not find comfort in that. I would not expect you to. But it is still true. He leaned forward slightly. The report to the Council will say that Vanguard encountered an uncontained glass moth cluster. Your team boarded, prevented an FTL event, and withdrew with heavy casualties. How that cluster ended up there will be handled in secure channels. Meaning buried, Sharp added. Meaning handled by people who have been playing this game longer than any of us, Falco corrected. I will not pretend they always make the right calls, but I know the alternative. I fought in the last war. You did not. You saw one nest. I saw fields of them. He looked at me again. You have a choice, Petty Officer Morales, he went on. You can carry Jonah's death as a private failure until it drags you under. Or you can accept that you made a decision doctrine would have required anyway, and keep serving with the skills that kept the rest of your team alive. Is that my only choice? I asked. For now, he answered. Take some time. Talk to the chaplain or whoever you people talk to off duty. But when you write your report, keep it in the lines. Do not give the Council an excuse to pretend this mission was anything but a bleak success. There it was. Not quite a threat. More like a warning. If I wrote the truth the way I had lived it, in all its ugly detail, with my hesitation and selfish calculation, they might decide I was unfit. Or worse, they might decide the mission was compromised. Maybe a small part of me wanted that. Wanted someone to slap cuffs on me, tell me I had failed, make the judgment I could not quite make for myself. But the larger part knew what would happen then. They would look for someone else to send into the next hull. Someone who did not know what glass moth felt like under his hands. Someone who might freeze longer than I had. I understand, I answered. Falco nodded once. You are dismissed, all of you. We will talk again when the formal inquiries begin. Formal inquiries, translation, endless paperwork, safe questions, decisions made far from any hull where bone had grown through steel. We filed out. I ended the day in the same place I had started it, standing in the corridor behind the anchorage's outer hull, hand on the metal. The ship thrummed under my palm. Normal systems, regular cycles, nothing like the frantic stutter of bone on steel. I tried to focus on that ordinary beat, on the comfort of a healthy hull. Instead, I felt something else. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran along the plate where my hand rested. Not the usual noise of fans or pumps. A pattern. I drew my hand back, heart kicking once in my chest. The pattern did not repeat. It might have been nothing. A stray piece of machinery clicking into a different mode. A minor imbalance in a generator. Or just my nerves misreading normal ship noise after hours spent inside a vessel that had been turned into a bone harp. I leaned my forehead against the hull, closed my eyes. "I am still here," I told the metal quietly. The ship did not answer, but I could feel the work of its systems under my skin. Maybe that faint pattern had been real. Maybe glass moth had left a fragment in my bones, something too small for sharp scanners, something that would grow in quiet, private ways. Maybe it was simply that once you had felt a ship repurposed into a living weapon, you never quite trusted any hull again. I opened my eyes and looked down the corridor. Tomorrow there would be more work, more hulls, more cut lines. They would send me to other ships and tell me to make doors where no doors existed, to open paths and close them, to weigh lives against missions in units of bulkheads. I would take the jobs, clip lines, crawl through ducts that were too narrow and pretend I did not remember the feeling of walls closing in. I would make choices. Some would be good, some would be selfish. Most would be both.